we're making like 1 billion packets of ketchup per second, right? I hear people talking about the population problem with humans, like there's 8 billion of us, it's really scary. But nobody's talking about like how many mustard packets there's no one thinking about the object population.
Hello, dear listener, and welcome to Strolling. In this extended episode, I'm speaking with Darin Stevenson, who I know primarily through his online publishing about intelligence and consciousness from both humans and non-humans. We're both technologists who are cautious about platforms, yet using them to help other people get a better sense for their dynamics. We had mostly engaged a few messages on Facebook every now and then, so after we pressed the record button here, we literally had our first conversation ever. Darin is quite perceptive, sensitive to the waters we're swimming in, and has a lot of great insights about technology, nature, and existence. Yet gave me plenty of space to share my own perspectives, and we had a wonderful dialogue. He invited me to speak with him in response to my video on scrolling, and I think it's clear that we both have a lot to say about the topics coming out of that. I hope you find our conversation illuminating. Let's get into it.
It's such a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
I've seen and been very impressed by a lot of your, how shall I put it, very rich content on your Facebook page, which is how I came across you.
Thank you.
You're one of those people who has a deep commitment to authentic and intelligent and creative communication. And I just love that. It's so inspiring, especially in the wasteland of mimetic, effluent that we're commonly exposed to.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you said that I'm inspired by your Facebook page, because that phrase in itself is kind of like perhaps surprising in some ways. Is it? I mean, it's of course people can be inspired by Facebook, but maybe we're both, maybe we have a certain point of view about Facebook. So, but also that's super kind of you to say, and I think, yeah, I mean, I would say similar words for some of the stuff you put online, like you're kind of hacking into the system way of posting and just kind of getting people to see things differently. Yeah, just really appreciate also what you're doing. So thanks for enjoying and thanks for having this chat.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an aura around the way that you and I each uniquely participate in these mediums, if they're even worthy of being called mediums. Because they're so highly and I think largely malignantly curated by the forces that developed and sort of populated them, right? So I had a conversation a few weeks ago with Sergio Topo, who I'll explain in a moment. So he was running a super popular Facebook page called Beware of Images. And he had about 300,000 subscribers. His posts these days get around 10 or 15 views. He's been thoroughly throttled by Facebook. He's a graphic designer who was using images to warn us about their danger, right? Which is why I bring him up, right? Because I think we're participating in the medium with a spirit of using it.
Yeah. The way I call it is trying to catch people where they are. But in some sense, we are using this medium that perhaps we both have a certain distaste for as a way to try and make people aware of those things.
As a computer technician, I started relating with computers probably in my late teens, actually. So that would be around 1980, 1981, when computers were just starting to become available to the common people. And my primary interests were music, art, and publishing. So I became a specialist in printing and publishing over the years. And I watched with fascination the rise of the internet. I recall in the very early days having a video conversation with a couple in Australia and feeling like, wow, this is the dream we had as children, right? This is like talking to people from outer space. And I was super excited, but I watched how email damaged a lot of relationships because we as humans are not prepared cognitively or emotionally for instantaneous communication, right? We're
Hmm.
just not, we never had that before. And at first I was,
Even at that time, you would describe it as instantaneous.
yeah. So email, right? I send someone an email, they get it, they respond, right? And this is
Right.
before
Okay.
text, right? This is way before text. And I lost a few of my closest relationships this way because I wasn't thinking carefully enough about the problem of temporality in human communication, and how it had been and how it was becoming. You couldn't write a letter to someone and have them get it right now. Right?
Yeah.
So I started to become suspicious probably in the late 90s. I realized like, something's going wrong here. And now I can articulate I think, very sophisticated things about those problems. But back then I was still like, what's the problem here exactly? Like, I can see this is dangerous, but I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
And over time, I started to become aware that the presence of computers in my life was harming me. Took time to figure out that my sleep problems might be related to disturbances in my circadian rhythms caused by constant exposure to blue light. Um, so yeah, and as first cell phones and then smartphones and that stuff developed, I stood back from it very intentionally. I got my first smartphone I had nothing like that until 2016 when a job
Uh,
basically required it, right? So I watched what was going on with other people and these, like staring into their hand kind of thing. And yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about it, but we're here today partly because of a sort of brief video you made about scrolling. And I'd love to hear what inspired you and any other thoughts that you care to share about the terrain I've covered so far.
yeah. Scrolling. Sorry, I have the name of my video project is called Strolling. So of course I choose a name like scrolling to describe this kind of thing. Yeah, the scrolling concept is sometimes I use pre-existing words with other connotations to just describe something that it's new for me anyway. Of course, I've been scrolling for a long time on a computer and phone, but never called it this. Now, when I call it scrolling, it means I am allowing myself to be subjected to kind of random things, and I'm not really in control of what's going on, and I don't have an end day. I'm basically just changing the channel. And I don't mean these to necessarily be criticisms or that one should feel bad when doing these things, but just to kind of not be aware, right? We were also changing the channel on TV, perhaps without awareness, perhaps with awareness. So perhaps it's also just not a new thing. But yeah, I just noticed myself overwhelmed by some of the things I've seen on social media and just kind of transfixed or drooling or whatever, just like, different states, but I feel like I'm not really in control of what's going on. And let's say since TikTok came out, how many years ago was that? Maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I've known since that time at least that there's this thing called TikTok, and it's really addictive, and everybody's just like scrolling from one video to the next, da, 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 da. And slowly all of these other platforms are trying to copy the same thing. I never used TikTok actually. I actually didn't even use Instagram I deactivated it for like 12 years. And I reactivated it in 2022 at the start of my video project because I wanted to put it on different platforms. And then all of a sudden I find myself on this platform again that I tried not to use. But yeah, so even though I wasn't using this addictive scrolling video medium, basically kind of watching it from the outside as one of the enlightened Twitter users who doesn't need one of those things. I can just do text. I can just scroll on text. I'm so smart. And now I find myself, oh, okay, I'm actually doing the video thing now. Probably not as much. I don't think I spend my whole day on it, but sometimes I don't realize I passed an hour doing that. And I didn't really want that to happen. So that was an interesting observation for me, perhaps in the last year. And I guess this year, like why the scrolling video, why now, maybe has to do with just getting the sense of these cycles where in the last 12 months for various reasons that have to do with, let's say, international events. I am subjected to something that's like overwhelming, and then it affects me for a long time, and then it takes me like maybe a few weeks or a month to feel like, okay, no, I need to do something that can help me get out of this, because I'm actually not helping anybody. If I'm sad about a situation that's happening somewhere else, I end up doing something that I feel is not actually helping that situation, or is it helping myself? And so just being aware of that. And again, I don't want to portray this as like a kind of criticism for anybody, because it's very tricky to navigate these waters. But yeah, I just kind of noticed this myself. I feel like I have more experience with tech stuff than most of my friends. So I have a way to talk about this with a certain level of credibility, maybe because of my experience with technology. And I try to simplify things. And I just felt I wanted to say something that could help people. And noticing also this pattern, if you don't mind me digressing a little longer about this video, one thing that I've heard many times in last year about certain current events, it's like, don't scroll away. This is like an instruction that comes from people who make certain videos. Don't scroll away. You have to see this, otherwise maybe you're a bad person or whatever, right? Or a lighter form, just like, well, we need to look at it here. We need to look at it on Instagram or on scrolling video platform, or as I say on the video, scrolling meme platform. We need to look here because we can't trust like the authoritative sources, because they're kind of corrupted by interests that are kind of not in your interests. And I was trying to point out in the video this subtle thing about how it might be true that we can't trust the mainstream stuff, but it doesn't mean that we can trust this stuff automatically. And I just wanted to point that out because it wasn't obvious to me. I obviously was totally involved with that without thinking. So yeah, more or less, that's kind of where I was. Yeah.
Beautiful. There's so much rich terrain here. It does seem that, yes, our historical propensity for something we call channel surfing has been captured by high technology. And I think it's ironic and very important to understand that when a product is called TikTok, it's going to change our relationship with time, right? And fundamentally for organisms, what we think of as our health or our capacity to heal, our capacity to grow and to have deep relationships and so on, these are primarily founded on synchronization, right? When we come together, when we eat food, when we say things, when we don't, when we go for a walk, when all these things, when we fall asleep and all of these things, they comprise the synchronization. And if you watch nature very closely, which I do, I adore every living thing. I love this planet just so deeply and passionately. And I've been like that since I was a little kid, that even though I became fascinated by machines, eventually I saw like, wait a minute, I think we have too many machines. And then wait, we have too many kinds of machines. And then wow, we're making like 1 billion packets of ketchup per second, right? I hear people talking about the population problem with humans, like there's 8 billion of us, it's really scary, but nobody's talking about like how many mustard packets there's no one thinking about the object population, right? And those objects offload entropy into living systems. And I'm very confused about if there was any forethought about this at all. How would we respond to the entropy that's offloaded by machines into our lives, into our minds, into our relationships? And perhaps unlike you, I want to very much highlight the cautionary aspect here. And I think there's something else that's really important, which is that I think it's dangerous to tell people what not to do because it's not very helpful. So most of the time you have to give them something better to do. Right? Show them here, do this instead. Whenever you're having this feeling and you want to just scroll, call your friend, right? Talk to a human being, get together, make some food together, go with people, go for a walk in the living places, right? Something like this.
I
Um,
suppose it could be that easy. I mean, I feel often I'm at a loss for what to say, specifically in the technological realm. The nerd part of me wants to say, "Oh, just use RSS feeds, or just read blogs, or just this kind of
I go to
agency-oriented."
Reddit. Yeah.
Oh, Reddit, yeah. Well, I mean, but it's not like I can't really tell people to do that. There isn't really a straightforward way. And unfortunately, also sometimes the straightforward way involves you using like some big tech company having all of your data and stuff. So I'm just uncomfortable with what to suggest. Actually, nature is probably a great suggestion, and I feel as weird as I think it is, I think a lot of people might interpret it as kind of flippant, like, oh, you don't get what I'm addicted to. Actually, if you're suggesting that I take a walk, come on, it's just like this is dealing with this is changing my nervous system. I need something like I don't know. So I feel at a loss for what to suggest, actually. I love the idea of just replacing it. Unfortunately, yeah, our need to use these things is hijacked. Everything is happening on these platforms. Our way to keep in touch with friends is happening there. Sometimes even work or important pseudo professional things that we need to kind of keep up with what's going on, like that's through the same channels. So it's being exploited to keep us there. And so it's harder and harder to just remove things. I try and just say at least maybe try and use something else for one thing. And we just start that way, one at a time. But yeah, I'd love to hear if you have like things that you think people have received well as alternatives to these things.
That's a good question. By the way, like, I want to be really clear, we're just exploring here. And I'm so glad to have you here and to hear your perspective. And I'm not trying to, like dictate what I think people should do, because that would be, sort of tyrannical and idiotic. I've just noticed that when something deleterious is going on, humans don't tend to respond well to being told not to do something. And so
Yeah.
if it's possible to think up something better to do, and I have some models of social network systems that could blow the existing stuff right out of the water and give us back the capacity to actually collaborate and stuff like this. Whether or not I'll ever chase them is a side question. But I remember, so yeah, TikTok is changing temporality, and all of these platforms change our experience of time dramatically. It's part of why I think they're addicting. I just wanted to mention this little anecdote. I was looking out my window one day, perhaps, I don't know, 18 years ago or something. And I saw a young mother walking with her perhaps 4-year-old daughter, and the mom staring into her phone, and the daughter's on the other side of her. The daughter's holding her hand, and the daughter's like looking up at her mom, like wide-eyed and watching her, and the mom is completely on the phone. And then the child gets a funny look on her face, and then she holds up her empty hand and just looks at it, right?
Wow.
There's something really important you said, vis-a-vis what we're exposed to on social media and the idea that we are obligated, that somehow our attention to atrocities is transformative of those atrocities, right? So pay attention because bad things are happening and you need to know about it. I had friends who were vegan, more power to them. Love that, love that idea.
What was the word?
Vegan, right? Vegan.
Oh, vegan. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they only eat plant matter.
Right.
And, some of them, a few of them would post constant streams of like slaughterhouse videos and stuff like this.
Mhm.
And there's another problem here, two actually, that I just want to broach. The first is, I don't think humans are equipped to think about the world, to think about things going on far away that we can't affect, but we can feel, right? For a very tiny part of human history, this has even been possible. It was impossible to think about the world, say, 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, right? There's no chance of it happening. You weren't getting news from China or the Ukraine or South America. You had no idea what was going on in other places. And most of your cognition and your problem solving ability and your vigilance for threats and opportunities was highly limited to a very local scope with people you actually knew, I think. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. And the other thing is like, apparently some people have the impression that posting about something rotten or malignant or terrifying on Facebook is somehow a form of action that that goes to solve that problem. And I don't think that's what's going on. In fact, I would argue that our capacity to post about something is actually replacing our capacity to form up together and act. Now, it's not only replacing it. It's not the only thing going on. We can use social media to form up and act together around problems, and that does successfully happen. But I think for many, many people, this display behavior replaces what might otherwise motivate us to become involved. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So I'm just trying to write down my other thought, but can you just repeat the last sentence?
Yeah, I'm concerned that our display behavior on social media, for many of us, not everybody, right? These are very complex matters. Those are trees with many branches, right? But the thing I'm concerned about is that display behavior steals from our motivation to actually form up together and respond intelligently to situations. It's not the only thing that happens, but it's a common thing that happens.
Okay. Yeah, this has a lot to do also with why I posted what I posted, but I try not to really talk about things in terms of this activist mentality. But of course, there's a layer there which I am thinking about, and there's a couple things. Well, I'll just go to your point, which is, yeah, the posting of atrocities as a way to get people's attention that something's happening, and I guess something solve the problem, right? Like it's sort of like, question mark profits. Like I don't think it's completely disconnected from solving the problem in some way. It's just, it has to do with the part of like getting people to know what's going on. I suppose like we need people to know what's going on in order to get them involved, maybe. So it's kind of a logical thing to do. But the organizing of that interest and energy, I think, doesn't happen automatically, and certainly won't happen just in the comments. I mean, it can, but it seems the way I think about it is it's a I'm not used to saying this on the internet, but I'm just going to go with it. So yeah, I think it's disconnected disconnected from how power works. So it's not, we're not voting, like when we pay attention to these atrocities on social media, the amount of engagement that gets is not a determining factor in how government policy changes. I think we understand that, but there's some maybe disconnect there. Like I think what people are imagining is that by posting it, you get people feeling angry about this, and then at some point everybody's just going to come together and we're going to demand, and it's going to become this big kind of demonstration or protest somehow. And perhaps that would work if there was like a critical mass in the real world. So like somehow that social media engagement translated to, let's say, even half the number of people engaged like on the street somehow, or on the street in the sense of like maybe they go on strike, or maybe they contribute in whatever way that would help that cause. Like they'd have to figure that out and everything. But okay, like if that happened, like maybe this would be a useful strategy. But I don't think that's what's been happening. There might be some instance of this working in this way, where somebody posts about something and people get involved and then it changes, right? Maybe we need more of the stories, but it seems like we have too much information already, and there's too many atrocities, and everybody's just kind of getting too much horrifying information, and we're kind of paralyzed from it, and we don't know what to respond to first, and then we don't do it, and then we're just not going anywhere. Um, that seems more like what's happening. And the other thing I wanted to say, that's kind of functional about the atrocity posting, is that sometimes it's not actually for everyone, even though people post into the pool of what's going on into the feed, and there's maybe an idea that like everybody needs to see this, but the functional result is that the people who will see it are basically people who are on the same page already. So you're not going to cross your bubbles by posting that thing. You're probably not going to surprise people. I mean, somebody might be like, oh, wow, I didn't know that was going on. Okay. But I think for the way things are happening now, there's so much of this stuff that I think basically people are talking to their in-group. And that's actually fine. It's totally fine for people who are passionate about a specific thing to talk to the people who are also passionate about that specific thing. But I don't think that's everybody. And I hope that they're not confused, that they think they're talking to everybody when they're just talking to their group. I heard a great phrase, which is kind of a summation of this, like demonstrations, protests, like demonstrations on the street are it's basically networking. You know, you're not going to change somebody's mind over there, right? The people who are there are probably already on the same page as you. And so anyway, everything I'm saying here in the second point is essentially, it's okay to preach to your choir, and you do need to preach to your choir to build this kind of momentum within your group. It just maybe should be clear that you realize that's what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on now because we have these constant streams of mimetic information and the sort of monolithic corporations that are feeding them to us, right, are psychographizing us purportedly for the sake of advertising, which I think is hilarious, right? Advertising has become some kind of a weird demonic force in human cognition and the infosphere, and but they're psychographizing us, meaning we're being analyzed and we're being segregated into groups within these corporations. And I guess a couple of the other things that stand out to me is when humans are exposed to media like this, they often undergo a sort of a crisis of authorization, which in the United States right now, authorization, right? Whether I authorize this piece of media or I object to it, or I have another perspective, or this is what I just ignore this stuff, right? There's an authorization sort of process that people undergo, and it transforms their thought. A great example is your song Teddy Bear. Instant authorization from me, right? I saw that and I was like, oh my God, this beautiful man, his heart, listen to this. Every child will understand, like, what a beaut, like, so this is what I'm talking about in a way, although I'm really singing the praises of your song Teddy Bear, which I think is just sweet and amazing.
Could I ask what you said, because you linked it to this authorization concept. I imagine that's something that happens before you encounter something or before you choose to watch something. But are you saying that you allowed yourself to watch it before you watched it, or did you?
No. What happened was, like, I came across it somehow, and I hit play. Immediate authorization in my consciousness. Yes, this, yeah, right.
What's the cue? Because you just push play, but you didn't hear much. Like, how do you?
After, yeah, you're right. It probably took like 45 seconds of listening, and I was just enchanted. Right?
Okay, you gave it a chance, and then you were like, oh, okay, this is wow. Okay, cool.
Exactly. But as someone who studies cognition and is very interested in language, it's clear to me that when we hear words at all, many of us, most of us perhaps, undergo a process where either we we authorize the speaker or we don't. And who is the speaker on the internet, right? These are people we don't know. And so often what we undergo is a process of authorizing the message as we understand it, right? Or objecting, or being critical, or just fawning, right? Thirst traps, for example. That's instant authorization for some audience segment. So yeah, a huge part of what goes on in human cognition has to do with authorization and hierarchy, right? And part of why we're in the United States right now in a crisis where we could elect a very strange human being to rule us is simply because that person objects to what we call it systemic authority, fundamental way. And that objection captures millions of angry people who can't stand the idea that there's any kind of authority other than what they think or what they object to or whatever their pet anger triggers are, right? So he captures that very effectively. And this is the primary reason why there's a danger of that person being elected. Love to hear anything that these thoughts spark in you or
yeah, you can keep going if you have more to say about it.
Well, what captivates you? What do you find entertaining or pleasing or nourishing what are some of the beautiful things that you appreciate about the content that you encounter? And what do you seek out when you're intentionally playing with the media?
Yeah. Now, I actually had this sensation of productivity when I first, let's say like 6 months after I started my video project and unlocked my Instagram and I started posting to Instagram, and about 6 to 8 months after, I was kind of on there regularly. And I never really got into the algorithmic feed. I was always very careful about that. I was like, I don't want to turn into one of those like people stuck in their phones. And yeah, so I always avoided that. Of course, the odd thing that slipped through somehow because everything's designed to provoke you in that way. But I had the sensation of productivity because there were a couple of things that I found, a couple of creators that I found, which were like totally where I wanted to be, or they were just kind of giving me what I wanted at the time, mostly around movement. So I was really into capoeira at that time, this Brazilian martial arts dance thing. And there were people doing that, or people just doing movement, flexibility, training, this kind of thing. Somebody talking about like food saving, like minimizing waste with organic stuff, and not too many. Let's say like a handful of things. And I thought, oh, how nice! I just get like one of these things every now and then. I don't really need all of them, but like it's useful enough, and I'm glad to have this information. And enough of those things that sort of transported into my real world, perhaps my movement practice, my dancing, or like it's helped me figure something out, or even this like this sort of psychology stuff. Like I don't pay too much attention to that, but there's some ideas in there that like, okay, yeah, that's really sensible. Or like I notice I'm doing that, maybe I change it, whatever, maybe it's changed something in my relationships. So these odd random nuggets have come out of that stream. And it's never prompted me to like find as much of it as I can. I just kind of take what comes and I go back to my day, and I try to manage that time I spend in the stream, whether it's algorithmic or not. And so, yeah, I've been grateful for those things. There are some recipes that I found which are just kind of fun to make for my partner. I was trying to cook for her, and because I had this phase where I wasn't doing that a lot, and I just felt like I want to make stuff for you because she was taking care of me so much. And so it was nice to have these recipes that are in accordance with her dietary restrictions, and I also get to feel like I'm practicing cooking and I feel more agency and whatever. So all these things, they're just little things, right? It's not, I can't say it's any specific thing, but there's enough of these things to give me a sensation of, yeah, initially I said productivity because I felt like, cool, I'm not spending my whole day scrolling, but I get a cool thing every now and then, and great, I can keep, I'm still actually quite in the real world. And actually, that was even the same time where I made this video talking about how I'm not even, I'm kind of, like I said, detached from online life because my Twitter life was sort of in hiatus for some time because I was living with this collective in Berlin and my social cup was saturated for like 3 months. I was having, everything was just happening in person. So I didn't need to look at my phone for anything. I didn't need to send a message to anybody because it was all just kind of there, a bit overwhelming. But I found myself not wanting to even look at Twitter, Mastodon. I had this newsletter that I used to write, and I didn't. It's like I was asking an older version of myself to write this. It felt forced, so I just kind of stopped, and I even made a video about this called "Detaching from Online Life," and yet at the same time, every now and then I would get some of these nuggets from the stream, but it was all kind of manageable. So that was kind of cool, and I don't know like at what point I got to where I was maybe more recently, but yeah, it's there was some loss of that deliberation to manage it. Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, to answer your question, it's just uh, kind of random stuff. I've oh yeah, so another big part of it, which I didn't mention. Yeah, I keep saying I was a Twitter person. So I was previously using social media for let's say like 10 years, mostly on what I call public social media. So like Twitter, blogs, newsletter, like this kind of broadcast medium. I have a certain bubbles that are there, certain topics around technology or like data sovereignty, self-hosting, whatever, different tech topics. Every now and then I would talk about like organizing information or like life or whatever. But I had this kind of this range of things that I would do mostly when I was online. And almost none of it had to do with my friends, actually, in public social media. It was all stuff I was interested in. It was all interest based. And so one of the things I was grateful for, and this was to answer your other question, is when I started using Instagram, my friends were there. And it's mostly my friends, actually. I wasn't following things out of interest. Those nuggets that I got were just these random things. And eventually maybe I followed a few creators that I didn't know, but most of it was actually my friends. And I appreciated just the way that people received my video project, the strolling project, because it kind of meant something to them, or they knew the people who were there, and it just felt like this social experience that um, seemed to be a healthy extension of what was happening in the real world. And I'd never
Mhm.
really experienced that on Twitter because I'd never engaged with my friends on Twitter. My friends wouldn't use Twitter because they're
Mhm.
not into the tech topics or they don't understand this like short form. So that was an interesting feeling also that okay, cool. I'm getting these nuggets, and I'm feeling actually more connected to my friends somehow. This is great. And someone later told me to, that Instagram is great, even just for the stories thing, because you get to see what people are up to, and then it's this here's the 24 hours. There's no guilt about catching up. I had all these perspectives about how it's nice to catch up with people. It's nice to see what people are doing, my friends are doing. I probably have a lot of them on Facebook, but I don't have this kind of sensation over there. I don't know why. But yeah, it was nice to have that. And I guess it still is to know what my friends are up to. But
I think I just became aware that there's a radical difference between what we experience on Facebook and what happens on Instagram because there's no, I mean, I'm not a big Instagram user. I have an account. I almost never touch it. Um, but I can go to Instagram and go to someone's Instagram and I can just see like images or stories of what's been going on and I don't see anything else, right? I just
mhm.
see that. I just see what they're doing, you know. And you can go to a person's profile on Facebook, but on Facebook you got the news feed, quote unquote, which is a very ironically titled situation, I think. So yeah, that's interesting, and I can see why that might feel human, much more human. and relational. I'm curious about, so when you talked about productivity, were you talking about creating content?
I was talking about feeling enriched in some way that carries into other aspects of my life without
Ah,
tying me to the platform somehow.
ah, I see. Ah.
Like even if I stopped paying attention to any of those things today, I'd still feel like, okay, cool, I have some tools.
Right. So it's as if you're curating your exposure to the medium and you're being selective about things that actually enrich your experience or your knowledge or your capabilities. You know, you mentioned capoeira. I study Tai Chi and have for 40 years. So movement is an important part of my life. And there's all kinds of things where I've got some little problem or something, or I have a question that I want to solve, and I can go to the internet and basically, you know, almost every time, or even if I'm worried about something, right? Something different happened that I don't know what it means, say with my health or any kind of thing, and I can go there. And there's a problem in that if we're afraid, I think, if or maybe I'll just speak for myself, if I'm afraid of something, right? And then I go to the internet, that can quickly effloresce into like
Whoa.
like I can get spun up, right? And I've had people come to me who've been spun up by the internet, and I've got to talk them down and go like, okay, let's start at step one. We're just going to go steps 1 and 2 here together for a few minutes, and never mind step 50 yet. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I just love that framing of being afraid and going to the internet as opposed to maybe other ways. I like the idea that you might realize you're afraid and maybe not go to the internet. I don't um, never never thought to think about it in those terms, but I think that's super helpful. And yeah, I think what I was saying in my scrolling video is really it's not even specifically about scrolling. It's just maybe like watching yourself and understanding how you engage with these things. And of course, scrolling is one dimension of that, but what you're saying is that it's another, it has to do with that as well. And just mindful use of these things. And I said the container is poisonous in my video. We're using this poisonous medium, which is scrolling, but we can still use it somehow if we're strategic and hopefully we don't hurt ourselves in the process. And yeah, I think that's what it's about. It's just trying to be conducive somehow, despite the circumstances.
I was really impressed with your video because it was very concise and coherent, right? And very human. And you didn't come off like an activist, quote unquote, right? The sort of flag waving, like, you shouldn't be bad people or you didn't come off that way at all. And sometimes perhaps I may be guilty of that. But it's refreshing to see someone whose perspective is sort of broader, more inclusive, uh, very down to earth, very human. And from what I've seen of your media and I mean, I primarily know you through Facebook. You seem to be someone with a not a deep concern. You embody heartful authenticity with other people, and you bring people into your life, and you converse with them about matters that are very deep and important to our daily lives, to education, music, to thinking about our situation, and sometimes even social media. I saw I saw a clip where you were speaking with a young woman, and she was talking about the importance of not going viral,
Hmm.
right? Which is just, I
Yeah.
mean, what a brilliant, like that really captured me because I was like,
Yeah.
wow, that's like everyone else seems to have the opposite concern. How can I get more audience share right now?
Yeah.
Uh,
I I see how she posts on Twitter and just is like following them, super interested, and it's really buzzing over there. And to hear her say this, I thought was just interesting. So yeah, I appreciate what you're saying about me or my projects, and it's very generous of you to have these sets. Also, quite striking to like considering we haven't really met in a kind of face-to-face
this is
setting.
our first time talking. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have this kind of reading, which I would hope that's how people receive me.
I mean,
I
it's
can
how
aspire.
you, it's okay. the aura of your presence in those videos, in the video I saw on scrolling, it's not okay, so my sort of primary game is as a creative intellectual, right? So I'm always using sophisticated language, and I'm talking about, problems with human cognition or technology or society or whatever, right? But you're doing something much when I see the media you create, it's very human, and it's charmingly it just draws you in a heartful way. And that I want to just say something about that. When I listened, for example, to Teddy Bear, it was like medicine for my soul, right? You're making not, you're making something really beautiful it's very clear that your heart is in it, and you're not there for it's not like you have an agenda, right? I mean, none of us would create anything if we were not motivated. But authenticity just rings in everything that I see you do. And that's so beautiful and nourishing and reassuring. I really celebrate that about what you're up to.
Appreciate it. I have two things I could say here, just about teddy bear, because if you tie teddy bear to authenticity, I feel like I could also, haven't said this to anybody, I think, but I think I could say this publicly, so to speak. My partner, who I wrote the song for, told me that, of course, I mean, she was overwhelmed because she's never received something like that, and but she was so baffled that she's like, "Oh, it's like pages from my diary, like, 'cause that's basically what actually happened. It's not like I'm dreaming something in a way, or it feels very real to her, you know. So to say authentic, real, like, I mean, I'm not trying to be too imaginative there, because the reality of our time is like that in our connection. So so it's interesting to sense authenticity in those terms. The other thing I wanted to say is about simple language. It's true, and I do deliberately try to do my videos in a simpler language. I don't force my guests or the people that I record with to speak differently. I encourage them, if they can, to try and like simplify if they can, but I don't force them to. I say you can be as you are. I do have an interest in not leaving people out. I know that terminology and jargon can, it's like, again, you end up speaking to your crowd, to the people who know those things, and that's totally fine. And I find myself always trying to like break out of bubbles and reach across the line and like whatever. So in this way, I consider it more strategic to speak with simple language, but I don't know for sure that it's actually working the way I think it does. I hope it is. We'll see. But an interesting dimension to say about that is each video that I've made of strolling, I have always considered my father receiving it, because he's obviously in a different generation than me. He kind of tunes out with like, in the past, he passed away recently, but like my process with strolling was to always consider him and how he would receive whatever is happening, whether it's me talking or whether it's somebody talking. So I always wanted to make sure that I wouldn't lose him. And of course, it's not guaranteed. Sometimes maybe I did, but I was surprised at how sometimes he was brought in to certain people that are quite the opposite of his inclinations politically or whatever ways, right? So those things I would consider successful. That, maybe you have some kind of stereotypical crazy artist type personality who's very free and wavy, and somehow if I had presented that person in that way as a kind of exotic or, I don't know, unrecognizable strangeness, then perhaps he wouldn't have been able to get it, or maybe he would have, there's nothing I could do about that. I don't know anything about art. I don't relate to this. I don't, whatever. But he was drawn into one of the stories that this person suggested and ended up watching some of the videos, etc. but this has been a very important thing for me. And now, even though my father's passed away, I think I will still try to do the same thing because for me, him, of course, I would love him to understand my project and care about it. I don't expect him to, but well, would have been great. And then he did, and I even recorded with him, and I shared some videos with him. But I, the way I've seen it is that if I can reach him, then there are other people perhaps like him or not like him, but it means I can reach other kinds of people who maybe have similar inclinations.
I'm so glad that you shared that particular concern and awareness. This is exactly the kind of thing I was hoping to hear, right? Like something about what motivates your way of working with media and how you communicate with people online. And that's just beautiful. I also lost my father pretty recently. Um, and I'm taking a page from you on this one because one of the things that you're saying is like, that I think it's really important to highlight. If you do the same dance every time, you're going to be dancing to the same people every time, right? If you do the dance that you're used to doing this one dance, and that's the dance that you got attention for doing, especially on the internet, right? Because attention, it's hard to avoid the power of it. And it can literally mean new opportunities, right? So if your audience grows dramatically, now you have opportunities we would imagine that you didn't have before, and some threats too, right? There's some downside. So I think it's very common for people to just want to grow their audience, like, if they make stuff. But I think what I'm hearing from you is something really beautiful, and I mean, it's exactly what I'd kind of expect. Well, no, it's not true. I'd have to have been prescient to expect it. It's just that you're communicating with your audience with the same kind of heartful attention that you might, you know, employ with someone who's in the same room with you.
Ideally, they are like if it's a
Right.
quick take, and ideally, it would feel like you're just sitting in front of us, or whatever. But yeah,
Yeah, that's actually how I felt when I watched your video on scrolling, which
right.
we have to make a distinction between strolling and scrolling. And these microphones don't always transmit the consonant sounds as clearly as we might
Yeah.
like.
Strolling
Um,
as in walking, scrolling as in social network.
yeah, I mean, most of the videos I made while walking, right? So I'm
Mm.
just out walking in the world for 4 or 5 hours, and I'll take 2 of those hours and
You're the champion stroller, man. You have a whole YouTube channel with like hour-long videos, and you're strolling and talking. I watched some of the videos. It's great. Yeah, I catch some of
wow, thank you.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it because, and, I'm kind of similar to you in how I use media. I'll let the algorithm play with me a little bit, but I don't sign in. We're using a browser technology that essentially hasn't changed since 1997. I could show you a browser technology that would look like it's from another universe, where every time you touch that thing, you would get smarter and everyone around you would get smarter. We're using the internet like the index of a book. That's the dumbest idea ever. And there hasn't been a single disruptor that came along and said, hey, wait a minute, there's this entire manifold of information, but we're going at it like the index of a book? What? That's not how our minds work. That's not how our creativity works. That's not how our emotions work. And so the problem is, one of the problems that I think is really important, and I won't sing about this too long, is that our minds emulate the technologies we're exposed to. So we need to build technologies that encourage our minds to blossom and our relationships to blossom, and perhaps even our dreams, right? Our visions of what it might be to be human together, or even when we're alone. We're building unimaginably sophisticated machines, but we're not yet commonly building intelligent societies. And on a small scale, you can find instances of people doing that, right? I'm sure you've had experience of that. You mentioned having lived communally, and that's a very intimate situation where people are, they're being human together, right? In a meaningful way, I like to think. So all I'm trying to point out is it's very strange. What happens is almost like the building of a skyscraper. And once that thing exists, I'll just pick Facebook as an example. It tends to pervade over some span of time. And I mean, has someone had a better idea? I haven't seen anything very interesting myself. Maybe you're aware of some things.
I want to believe that many people have had great ideas. Maybe we don't have the environment to support those kinds of ideas because what tends to get pushed forward has to do with what can get investors a return on their investment. And it seems like that's basically how the tech world works. You have an idea, you pitch it to investors, and if they like it or they think they can make money by selling something in the end, then they'll give you a loan and then you go and do the thing, but you always have to make sure it can get them the return. So when things are shaped that way, when every idea has to be shaped that way, it becomes very challenging to do something like what you proposed, where every time you touch it, you become more conscious, more whatever as a human. Like that's not inherently profitable, maybe, or perhaps it could be, and maybe it hasn't been explored in that way. But I feel like that has to do with why technology is the way it is.
I remember going to the performance of one of the teachers at the University of the Pacific in Stockton and watching for the first time in my life a man play classical music on a lute. And I lost my shit. I buried my face. I was just crying. I was crying, right? I couldn't handle the beauty of it. It just seemed like, did I come in this room and just die here to the beauty?
Music from the 1500s, yeah.
Yeah. I have so many other questions, but perhaps this might be a good time for us to wind down. What are your thoughts?
I also have stuff, but I think it's kind of late and I have an early flight, and I'm sure we can chat again. I would love to meet you in person and pick you up on your offer and hang out in San Francisco. So
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
yeah, I think let's do that. I think there's enough to chew on here.
Right on. So much
And
appreciation.
yeah, thank you so much. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for your questions and your attention and your interest in what I'm doing. It's very heartwarming to have someone take an interest in what I do on the internet in this way, and then to react in a way that feels like kind of concordant with what I was trying to do in the first place, which seems to not happen so often. But yeah, I appreciate your honesty and your time, and yeah, it's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so grateful, man. Really enjoyed it. And I hope you have a great rest of your night and a beautiful flight. And let's talk again sometime soon.
Yeah, would love that, man. Peace.
All right. Peace for now.
That was my extended conversation with Darin Stevenson on strolling. You can hear more of his reflections as he strolls through nature on his YouTube channel. Watching those often helps me notice how what we consider normal can actually be quite strange. You might also like my exchange on strolling with Alex Kennedy, who I spoke with about being online versus offline, or with Lars Schmidt, who deeply considers our connection with language, technology, and nature, or with Joe Vavra, whose projects explore ways of collective intelligence and living. Find all this and more at strolling.rosano.ca. That's strolling.rosano.ca. See you next time, and thanks for listening.